I too would like to begin with acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we're all meeting on here today and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I'm joining you from Ngunnawal in Ngambri country today. So yeah, my name is Tanja Strive. I'm a virologist with CSIRO and I've worked on rabbit biocontrol for the better part of 2 decades now. And Peter asked me to put some slides together on optimizing the use of RHDV1-K5, but I've given it a byline, which is what to realistically expect, because I think when applying augmentative biocontrol, expectations are sometimes a little bit different from the results that are achieved. And I hope I can explain a little bit today why that is and how, releases can be done to get the best possible outcome. So I'll start with the definition of the biocontrol versus a biocide, because that's a really important difference to make in this whole conversation. So a biocontrol agent is a thing that once introduced in the population, it establishes and spreads, and it causes recurrent outbreaks. And examples for this in Australia are myxoma virus, RHDV1 and RHDV2. Biocides, by contrast, are products that are used for augmentative control, and they act locally. There is limited spread. There's no evidence for it establishing and causing repeated outbreaks. And the RHDV1-K5 product that you can buy is an example of a biocide. So, and why does this now not move? Come on, here we go. Yes, it does. So what happens after the initial release of a self-spreading biocontrol? This is actually a graph from the weed biocontrol literature, but it's really good to explain the general concept, which is why I've repurposed it. So I've just, going back. So there's boom and bust populations driven by things like droughts before the arrival of a biocontrol agent. Then the agent spreads into the population, achieves an initial big knockdown in the population, and then establishes and causes repeated outbreaks. That is driven by recruitment, so by the generation of a new generation new cohort of susceptible individuals. So if we transfer this to rabbits and viruses, it pretty much works the same way, with the difference that with rabbits and viruses, we also have, after it has established, the issue of population immunity to deal with. All that notwithstanding, is these self-spreading biocontrols like Myxo and RHDV2, they are doing a massive amount of heavy lifting in the background. This is from a exchange with Brian. It's an estimate that Myxo still kills about 50% of rabbits that it infects, and RHDV about 70 to 80. It may not go through. Both diseases may not go through every year, but if they do, they could take out up to 90% of rabbits that are born each year. And there is still a residual population that causes the pest management headaches that many of you on the call here today are dealing with. And to make that problem worse, many of these residual population are partially immune. So, and that's where biocides come into play as one of the many tools of integrated pest management, together with other tools that can be used to manage these residual populations. So how to optimize the results from a K5 release? So the level of success from a K5 release depends on the levels of immunity in the population. So, and I'm going to go through a couple of examples that explain a little bit why we end up having population immunity after an outbreak. So it's the echo of past outbreaks, excuse the typo there. And why is population immunity so high sometimes? And there's 2 parameters in this context that are important. One is the percentage of animals that gets exposed to the virus and becomes infected. That's a prerequisite to die from the virus. And not all of these animals die, and the percentage of those infected animals that die is the case fatality rate. And both of those things together determine the reduction in your population and the level of immune rabbits that you end up with. So just as a really simple example, you have 100 rabbits without immunity at all, 95% become infected. If a virus goes through for the first time, kills 80% of those, you end up with 5 rabbits that didn't get infected and survive. 95 get infected, and of those, 76 die. You end up with, these survivors as the residual population knockdown of about 76%, and 80% of those will have antibodies after this outbreak. So in these guys, the residual population, they are next year's immune breeding population, and they are the ones that really need all the attention that we can give them. So if we use a similar sort of formula to calculate what could we expect if we do a K5 release right, so it's mostly recommended to do it at the end of the season, so late autumn. If it's well executed, you could imagine that you're getting the virus to 90% of the rabbits that take the bait, so 90% infection rate. Of those, 80% will die. But if you start with a population where half of them already have antibodies, you basically have 50 immune, 50 naive rabbits. These ones, some of them won't get infected, some of them will get infected, many of them will survive, and of the naive rabbits, some of them will not get infected, some of them will get infected and die, and these are your survivors. Your residual population is going to be this, so you get a knockdown rate of about 36%, and almost everyone who remains in this mix would be seropositive at the end. However, there is a little glimmer of hope here, because K5 is a little bit different to RHDV2. RHDV2 is the proper biocontrol, the dominant virus in the landscape. And K5 can actually overcome, to some degree, immunity to RHDV2, and it appears that this ability increases with the time between the two infections. We have very limited data on this, so up to 10% in animals with a fairly recent infection, and up to almost 30% if there was 4 weeks between the two infections. It's not a huge amount of data, but it's enough to make an educated guess. So if that is true, you could get an additional number of rabbits that your release takes out, and you'd get a knockdown rate of between 40 and 50% roughly. And that is really, in the current landscape where population immunity levels are present in basically every rabbit population we've ever looked at, this is the best possible outcome you can hope for. So it's a bit less, so assuming that, there is 80% seropositivity in the population, these numbers change, and 70 to 80% population immunity is something that is quite frequently observed. The last large-scale data that we have collected on this dates goes up to 2022. So 80% is not unusual. And if all goes well and the virus release is executed really well, you get a knockdown of about, 20 to 35%. And that's what's commonly reported, what people see. So when to not do a K5 release, and most of you will be aware of that, and it's in the SOPs and in the in the little leaflet that comes with the product. It should not be used when young rabbits are present, so RHDV1, and that includes RHDV1-K5, is not fatal in young rabbits. This is just a graph from a 2002 publication. This basically shows that up to age of 4 weeks, almost all rabbits survive, and then you get this S-shaped curve, and at the age of about 10 weeks onwards, most of them are fully susceptible. This time frame can be pushed out if maternal antibodies are present. So that's the indicated here by dou theta. So, basically, and that makes RHDV1 different from RHDV2. So it does not really kill 5-week-old kittens, whereas RHDV2 does. So today, what happens if it's done at the wrong time? Going back to this example calculation. So assuming it's done at the height of the breeding season, rather at the end of the breeding season, where the population now is 400 rabbits because they've been breeding. 80% of those are kittens.
5 minutes.
No worries. Assume they have 80. They have no antibodies. 20% are adults, and they all have antibodies. Just for simplicity, the case fatality rates in these kittens, on average, will go down. And again, this is just an example. But what will happen is, if we walk through this example again, blah blah, we end up with a residual population of between 264 and 277 rabbits. So the knockdown rates don't look too bad, but this residual population is really, really high. And they are the immune breeders of the next season, when rabbits will start doing what they do best, which is to breed up. And just to illustrate that, and this is an illustration only, I am not a modeler. I just wanted to put a graphic display of this very, very simple example in that little cartoon here. Basically, the replication rates in this cartoon up the top. So just to see what difference it makes in a good breeding season that runs through winter, spring, that basically runs all the way through to autumn, which we've seen this year. The difference that it makes if you start with 79 versus 277 rabbits, that's assuming no additional follow-up control is done, is quite astounding. But if additional follow-up control was done with a K5, a well-executed K5 release done right, and then effective follow-up relentlessly with conventional tools, or combinations thereof, whichever is available, and you manage to drop your residual population down to 20 rabbits, it makes a huge difference in the next breeding season. So it is really worth putting in the extra effort at the most counterintuitive time when the numbers are lowest. And yes, every immune rabbit that is removed prior to the next breeding season is worth its weight in gold. So one slide, just as a reminder of how to use K5. The QR code there is to the National SOP, hosted on the PestSmart website, and they're about to be updated. So the product flyer that comes with the virus that you buy still includes injection of trapped rabbits. We no longer recommend that, really. We recommend to get it out on a bait. The reason of that is again high levels of population immunity. So chances are the rabbits that you inject are already immune, and they will just mop up your virus. Whereas if you do a really well executed bait release with free feeding and get lots of individual animals exposed to the virus, you will produce more carcasses as a source of secondary infections. And it's really worth optimizing these bait releases. And then second last slide, how can I find out how immune my target population is? So currently the Elizabeth MacArthur Agricultural Institute, which is part of New South Wales, DPIRD, they are, as far as I'm aware, they provide pre-testing as a fee-for-service. So rabbits need to be shot or trapped and killed. And again, for that, I would recommend to refer to the relevant SOPs. Ideally, at least 20 rabbits should be tested to be reasonable confident on the immunity levels, the prevalence estimates. They get really, really unprecise if you only look at like 10 rabbits. It takes a few days, and at this point in time, unfortunately, there is no handheld diagnostic system like a lateral flow assay that you could apply in the field. We don't have that yet. It would be very nice to have going forward. So last slide. Should we still use it? Absolutely, I think, because it remains the safest rabbit control tool that we have. There's absolutely no risk to any other species. A 30% reduction that you get on average is a good point to start. However, expectations need to be managed. It's very unlikely to achieve more than 40, 50% in the best possible circumstance. And it always needs to be followed up with something else. And while I don't have any data for what I've written there at the bottom right, so if you don't know what your population immunity level is, it's probably worth doing it anyway, and then basically treating it as a free feed or pre-feed for a subsequent, other pinned-on application or something like that. But it should always be followed up with something else. And that's it.